Hey guys, John deRoulet, Head of Revenue Management Education here at Wheelhouse, and today we're going to do a data deep dive into Rotunda, West Florida. It's going to be a great opportunity for us to look into some market data and just get an idea of how the summer is progressing, what to kind of expect through the rest of the year, and how to prep for next year so that y'all can make as much money as possible. Before I get started, I did want to give you a little sneak peek and an insight into something that Wheelhouse is offering, and then we'll kind of move off that and just jump straight into the market data. I'm going to be talking a lot about market data that is available in Wheelhouse for free right now. All of the market reports, including the market report for Rotunda West that I pull up, are available to anyone, regardless of whether they're a Wheelhouse pricing customer or not. In addition, I'm going to reference a lot of things like pace and occupancy and stuff like that. And, I can tell you what the market data is, but you also have to relate it to your own portfolio. If you need some tools to be able to see things such as where your occupancy is, what your historicals look like, and especially what your pace and where your sales are occurring, Wheelhouse does have a free performance insights suite for you. All of our performance insight analytics are available for anyone. All you have to do is sign up and link your account. And you can access this information and even combine it with the market information. So if you'd like access to this performance analytics suite, or you would like some training on how to utilize it, let us know and we'll get you started. In the meantime, I'm going to jump into some market data here. And we'll dig right into kind of what's going on. So what I'm going to look at today is a Wheelhouse market report. Wheelhouse market reports are kind of like high-level reports that give us metrics in the market. This is one of the many business intelligence tools we have. Like I said, we do have a business intelligence tool for your own portfolio, so you can see your own portfolio's pace and sales at a glance all the way down to the daily level. But for now, we're going to stick to this kind of market level. In addition to this, we do have a tool set called Dynamic Sets, which allows you to get into specific neighborhoods, specific regions, specific comp sets, and really filter down into whatever you want to look at. For now, we're going to stay on this market report to get an idea of the overall what's going on. But if you'd like more information, would like to take a deeper look, let me know. So first thing to kind of notice here is we do have some highlights. As you know, over the last few years since COVID, a lot of markets have seen pretty big increases in active listings, but that's starting to kind of turn the other direction in a number of markets. So many markets are probably still dealing with the fact that there has been a lot of inventory in the markets that have been added in since COVID, and we're still kind of like acclimating to that environment. But in some markets, we're starting to see that turn back the other way, right? As occupancy kind of comes under pressure, costs have gone up. We do see that some of those areas that are really overbuilt have kind of dropped down. In this Rotunda West market area, which for us right now is pretty big, we include, bunch of these market areas, but most of the listings are down right here in the southern part and up here under Venice. But we are starting to see a slight reduction year over year in the number of active listings that we're observing. Now, this does match some of the things that I've seen from other data providers. I was recently in Miami at the VRMA Executive Summit, and both AirDNA and Key Data also noticed that we're starting to see that kind of high growth really level out and in some cases start to retract. Let's hop over here now to the trends section. Trends, I think, are one of the top places to go, especially if you're just getting a high level kind of viewpoint of what's going on in the market. It's going to show us a number of different KPIs, and it'll give us the month over month and year over year. So you can really see how things have been changing over time in these marketplaces. And you can do so in a way that's not so complicated that you really have to dig in. You can really see kind of what's going on at a glance. Now, I'm going to start with adjusted occupancy because adjusted occupancy, I think, is one of, occupancy itself is one of the main metrics to utilize when getting a high level understanding of what's going on in the market. For one, occupancy represents demand. The higher the occupancy, the more people have heads in beds, the less available choices you have for the consumer. So it really is a great surrogate for just understanding the demand environment. A little bit later, we're going to look at asking rates, which are what people are advertising. And that's a great way to understand like how the market is reacting. But for now, occupancy is going to give us just a good idea of what's going on. Now, the first thing I kind of notice is between 2023 to today, we're seeing some pretty big retractions in overall occupancy at the market level. And that's been a trend that generally has been happening over the last couple of years since COVID. Now, I'm going to flip off 2023 because for now, I think the big thing to pay attention to is 2024 to 2025. That's going to be most top of mind of what's going on for folks. And honestly, when you trim down the data like this, it makes it very easy to make some quick assessments about what you're going to do, which will influence your strategy. And also, in addition to that, this is a great chart to be able to talk to owners. If you're talking to owners about what is going on in a market, there's a lot of KPIs you can use. And honestly, owners aren't directly in our industry all the time. So occupancy is a great way because most people understand that. If occupancy is down, usually that means less people are making money. If occupancy is up, it usually means that there's a lot of demand in the market and you can take advantage of it. Now, looking at this 2024 and 2025 occupancies, and keep in mind, this is market level occupancy. We're looking at every listing in the market. We haven't filtered down into different performance groups. We haven't filtered down into different bedrooms. We're just trying to get a macro perspective of how things are going. I really advise actually that you do this kind of macro analysis at least once a quarter because it's going to influence how you approach your pricing, how you approach your minimum length of stay restrictions, how you're going to talk to your owners and your executive team members. In the current season and the coming seasons as well, right? You really want to be thinking ahead as you're doing revenue management. First thing I notice here is going to be pretty obvious to you guys. High seasons are going to be Q1. You really have a strong February, March high season. Summer, while not the high season, does get a nice bump up in July. Low season being August and September. And it's actually a pretty stable, solid shoulder from October through January with some decent occupancy on the books, April and May. Now, starting out the year, the market really did maintain its occupancy. And this is something, if you've been listening to other markets and kind of hear what's going on, you'll have noticed people say that there's been a lot of concerns about occupancy pressure this year. Many markets in the country were actually pretty stable in January and February, right? And it wasn't until March and April that we started to see this pressure on the occupancy kind of early. Now, you guys, as a Q1 high season market, really are a bellwether for other folks. So while January was pretty strong, it's not the top month of the year. Once we get into February, though, we immediately start to see some pressure on the occupancies, right? Those occupancy pressures are really evident to you, and they pretty much extend all the way through the year until here. So February is down. March is down. Now, March, maybe you could chalk it up a little bit to Easter, but at the end of the day, that Easter occupancy doesn't show back up in April. That could just be because it's past the seasonality since Easter was so late this year. It could be that, that one's a little up in the air because we know those events have a big impact. It's really hard to know if the customer is just going to move and there's going to be the same amount of demand. But at the end of the day, from February, March, April, May, June, all the way into July where we're in now, we'll talk about July, but the last 4 or 5 months, we've seen occupancy pressure in the market consistently. So, if you're talking to an owner about this, it seems like a pretty obvious thing. The market is down. We need to be more competitive. We need to think about how we're going to approach this because it's likely that we can extrapolate forward this trend, right? Maybe things will get better. Maybe things will change a little bit, unknown what's going to happen in the market, but you're probably a good place if you extrapolate this forward and say, hey, we should expect that there's going to be occupancy pressure in the future as well. And now you can start to have the conversation of what do we actually want to do about this occupancy pressure? Now, you guys do have a Q1 high season, right? And so you really early are going to experience, in reality, you're kind of a bellwether for other markets. People should be looking at your market and other Florida markets that have Q1 high seasons. I also recommend people look at markets like Miami or New Orleans or Charleston or Nashville, some of these urban markets that tend to have very, very strong Marches as their high season. And also keep an eye on them too, because, if they're experiencing trouble, it may be something that's, that you can prepare for too. I usually suggest that people who have summer high seasons look to markets like yours early on, but that does apply now because right now, if you look at the Panhandle, you look across the Eastern Seaboard, they are in their high season. And so if you have an opportunity to pay attention to what's going on in those markets, what you can do is kind of get an idea of how is the travel market doing in general? Because if they're struggling now, you may start to think well, hey, do I need to start thinking forward a little farther? Is that going to extend into our next kind of shoulder season? Is that going to extend all the way into our high season? Are other markets seeing this pressure as well? It is useful for you to pay attention to these other markets. Now, because you're a Q1 high season, you're kind of at the front. But this summer, it is worth paying attention to what's going on in other markets too. And the short answer to that is obviously every market's different, but things have settled down a little. A number of markets that have summer high seasons are under a little bit of pressure still from the occupancy perspective, but it's not as bad. Users are not as panicked as they were in the March kind of April timeframe. However, the thing to keep in mind is many expert revenue managers are being much more conservative about their rate position. They have really, at the professional level, abandoned big premiums in advance. They are trying to extend the booking window, even though the consumer is really resistant to it. And they've gone to their teams and owners and said, hey, these markets may be under pressure. We really want to put the base of business on first, even if it's at a lower rate, because we don't want to be competing in the short term. You guys can pay attention to that. You have a low season coming up, but it's something to pay attention to as you start to get into the early booking window for your next high season. Now, in terms of what's going on in July, August, and September, things look okay here. July, we have maybe about half of what we had on the books last year with a little less than 3 weeks left. Heuristically, to me, you kind of want to be entering the month with at least half, not 2/3. So there's some areas with really short booking windows, but even that is a lot to book at the last minute. So my guess is, just looking at this at a glance, is we're probably going to fall a little short. Now, looking forward into August and September, the booking window must be very, very short here. It is clearly like the lowest 2 months of the year from an occupancy perspective. It's hard to just know at a glance because there generally is so much less occupancy on the books at this time, right? So I did pull up some of the pacing information. If you want to do it yourself, what I did is I took this occupancy value from last year, 42.2%. I went over to our historical lead time distribution for July, and I found about how far we are till the end of July. So 20 days. That means we had about 34% of listings were booked within that time frame, which means 66% were booked outside of it. So I multiply that 66%. Whoops. By the 42% here, and I can get an idea of roughly where the pace was. So I went ahead and did this for you. We actually have this coming as an update to the system, so you don't have to do that work. But at a glance, the pace last year at this time was at about 28%. So right now we're at 23.7. We're almost 20% lower than we were in the previous year, and a 4% growth. So the market is still trailing. It's very likely that we're going to fall short as we have in previous months, because right now we are pacing behind. Now, that amount pacing behind doesn't seem to be quite as bad. We're only 4% behind pace as of last year, whereas June ended, over 10% behind. So it does seem like we've seen in some of the high season markets that maybe summer is settling out a little bit. People are loosening up and going out and taking those travel, but it does look like it's going to be a more competitive environment unless there's a big change in the booking pace in a very short amount of time. Now, I did the same thing for August for you guys. Last year at this time, we were at about 8% occupancy. So 8% versus 4.7%. It means that about the same amount that's trailing in July is trailing in August. And, there's a lot more time to deal with August. So if you look into your portfolio and you're finding that you're pacing behind, you want to go make some adjustments before the market does so you can try to capture the market share now. If you're actually pacing ahead, you just need to watch your pace really close, and you need to make a decision because the market's a little behind. It's a little behind for July. You may start to see other players in the market start to adjust, and if you want to get ahead of that and try to be more conservative and more safe, you can make some of those smaller adjustments now to, again, just take the market share. Now, looking forward into September, we have very little on the books right now. I did pull this up for last year as well. Last year, this was at about 4%. So again, that same kind of occupancy gap seems to be missing across the board. The question is whether it'll grow in the short term. But over the next 3 months, things seem to be following the trend over the last 5 months and are just trailing in occupancy. And something I just recommend, that really comes out of working with so many of these professional revenue managers is when a market is under pressure, you really want to look further out, right? Because whenever there's more vacancy in the market, anyone who isn't paying attention is suddenly going to drop their rate or going to have to compete with everyone else in the short term. The more market share you can take further out at a rate that's reasonable for you, the more of a comfortable position you'll be in when you enter that short-term window. And so for those people who are only looking out 30 days or maybe looking out 60 days, I really recommend look out a whole nother season. Just as a reminder, if you don't have great tools to easily see your own pace in your portfolio that far out, let Wheelhouse know. We have a free business intelligence tool set that makes it really easy for you to spot your occupancy by day and also see your sales and where those sales are coming in. With just a few clicks, that is free, and we'd love to get you set and trained. In the meantime, knowing that the market is trailing a bit is really important, because how your portfolio is doing compared to that is really going to influence what you decide to do and what actions you need to take and what kind of conversations you're going to be having with your owners. Now, one other thing I really wanted to pull up is you guys have a Q1 high season, and there are some early bookings for that too. So when we talk about August and September, occupancy is pretty low here. It's not that big of a deal. In fact, if you are holding any premiums and you know the market's trailing, just bring that down to your historical rate. But you have a big high season and those booking windows can start early. So I did pull up the 2026 occupancies. And in an interesting kind of counter situation, we have 4% on the books for February right now. February is a solid month. It's pretty far away. It's over 230 days away from now till the end of February. And at this time last year, the market was only at 1% occupancy. So even though everything has been trailing in the short term, the early booking window, the long booking window, is actually doing better. Now that's pretty interesting. And I do want to bring that up because there was a similar situation happening last year. If any of you guys went to DARM last year or VRMA, you would have heard Key Data and AirDNA talk about how early booking was up, but it was up at a lower rate. And very, very quickly as we got into January and February, that reversed. So even though early booking was up, many markets across the country ended up trailing. So you got to kind of take this with a grain of salt. What it means is that, one, if you want to get ahead, you can, because there are people looking, and a really savvy revenue manager may really want to take advantage of that by making sure their rate is competitive and acceptable and not just putting out premiums and are like, I'll deal with it later. What it also means, though, is you can't get too greedy. You can't take your eye off the ball, because even though we were pacing ahead at the beginning of last year, we ended up falling behind across a number of markets in the US. Another thing I like to take a look here is just what is going, we're looking at the entirety of the market, but I also like to take a quick look at what is going on in just the high performers. I like to see if there's some different trends here, just to see if there's some different behavior among the high performers compared to the market at large. The first thing to note is, one, the overall occupancies are significantly higher. So when we look at the market, those occupancies were, if we look at this, they're a lot lower in every season. So the top performing 20% is taking a significantly higher market share of the bookings. In addition to that, the kind of attrition that's being experienced is much less. For one, January didn't just maintain, it performed significantly better. February, looking pretty strong here. Very little attrition, but still a little. Now we see a lot more in March, but a lot more of that is made back in April. Even though it's still down a little bit, they're really maintaining, of the occupancy there's taking a big piece. Now, of note, however, there's still pretty big drops in May, June, and July, while it's pacing much better, is still pacing a little bit behind, right? So overall, we are seeing that the higher performing group is taking a much larger market share. In terms of what they're doing. August too, a lot more on the books, almost double what was on the books, or more than double what was on the books in the market at large, but still pacing fairly low. Now, the high performers might be pretty close to on pace, right? They could be pretty close here. And that's a good sign for those top performers, but it does mean that there's still pressure and that these top performers are taking more of that. And so if you don't have properties that are in that category of being a top performer, you probably need to take action a little bit more than those top performers in order to take some of the market share back. And you're going to do that by offering value over just competing, right? So you need to make adjustments to the price, have some conversations about ADR, make some movements a little further to try to take bookings earlier so that you're not competing with them when everyone else is also competing on rate. Next thing I like to look at is asking rate. So I've gone over here to our asking rate section on the report, and where occupancy is going to give us an idea of what the demand is in the market because we're seeing what's actually coming together. Asking rates are the average of what rates people are advertising in a given month. That means what are people actually putting out on the channels. Where occupancy tells us about demand, asking rates tells us how the market is responding, what the market thinks the value of these properties are, and how they're reacting to what's actually going on in the demand. So we're back to looking at the entirety of the market. And the first thing to note is you'll notice that outside of kind of this January and February, March time period, where January is about stable, March is about stable, February is down a little bit, most other months, people are actually advertising a little bit higher rate than what they advertised last year. That means the market is expecting things to be a little bit better, or they maybe have a higher cost basis, so they need to charge more. But this is a mismatch to what we're seeing in the occupancy situation. The consumer in some way is rejecting this pricing, and they're not purchasing in as much volume as they were in previous years, despite the fact that the pricing is higher. To me, this is an indicator that the market itself is a little bit unoptimized to the consumer. And frankly, this isn't something that's uncommon to see in our space. Our space, because we have individual homes that can only sell once for a given day, tends to err on the side of like, I want to take the risk to get the higher ADR. But in situations where occupancy is retracting, that's a very risky strategy and can result in a lot of vacancy. Because the other thing too is you might have a feast or famine situation where we saw that those top performing properties are really taking a substantially higher market share. They may be doing fine, or in fact, they may be doing better. So you have owners who are in a top performing property, they may be like, the market's doing absolutely fine. But then you have a whole bunch of other people who are getting less occupancy, even though their rate is higher. Now, that higher rate may make up for the fact that there's less occupancy, but at the end of the day, if you have rooms to fill, the goal is to get both. Get the high rate when you can, but fill as much occupancy as you can too, because any occupied night is going to be worth more than zero. This trend goes from about April all the way into the future. You can see that the market is generally just pricing higher than what they did last year, and the market is not responding to the fact that occupancy is under pressure. This is true even in the summer, and once we get a little further into the future, August, September, October, November, you see that even though these are low seasons, people are just kind of holding premium rates out there. To me, again, that's another kind of unoptimized situation. Even though the market knows that those are low demand periods, they're not really pricing for the demand in that time period. They're pricing a price because they maybe don't have time or don't have the bandwidth to pay attention and make it competitive. For you as a revenue manager or a property manager, especially if you're just trying to make up for some shortfalls or you're trying to get even further ahead, this is a big opportunity. If you're able, you may not need to cut the price below what you were doing last year or where you might cut it in the last minute. But if you make some adjustments and you're thinking a few months out or a season out or even 2 seasons out, you can make some minor adjustments here and potentially take more of the market share, because the market in general is not well optimized. They're not really adjusting those rates in response to the occupancy, and they kind of are keeping premiums as early as 30 to 60 days out kind of consistently. That means there's opportunity there. Now, you're not necessarily going to change the whole demand situation and fill up all of your properties, but you may only need to make some minor adjustments out there to just take a significant chunk of occupancy that would have otherwise been vacant and is just going to add to your total occupancy. Now, let's take a look at the high performers in this group as well. So I'm going to switch to the high performing cohort. And what's interesting to me about this is you do see some pretty significant differences. So for one, we know the high performers are taking a much larger market share. Overall occupancies in the top performing listings is significantly higher. And January, which was really strong, you see a slight edge in price. They weren't pushing too hard, and they were able to drive a lot of the additional revenue through occupancy. But once that pressure starts to appear, you actually see the top performers adjusting quite a bit. February, those average advertised rates are lower than what they were doing last year. In March, they're lower. And in doing so, they're able to take a much bigger share of that occupancy, right? They are taking occupancy basically out of the lower quadrants into the higher one by competing with them on price with a property that's maybe doing better. And that stays consistent, where when we're looking at the entirety of the market, almost everything is higher. The reverse is true in the top performers. The top performers have been willing to be much more conservative on their rate, to go a little bit below what they were doing last year. And not only that, they're looking a little further out. July, already cutting that rate to make up that shortfall. August, almost no premium. So they're moving that forward. Now, they do still have a little bit of a problem. Once we get to September and October and November, we do see those rates start to ramp up, likely a far future premium kind of situation where people are just putting premiums in because they either don't have the bandwidth or they're operating off of a strategy that's like post-COVID. But at the end of the day, if you really want to get ahead, you have some opportunities here to even beat these top performers and look out into September, into October, into November, and place your price somewhere reasonable. Look at where you were selling last year and place your price in relation to that. It's not uncommon for me when I talk to people, especially people who have these kind of like COVID era strategies where, hey, you risked underselling because demand was so strong, so you always wanted to keep the rate high. That's not really the situation anymore. But those premiums and those automations are often still in people's systems. So we'll look at someone's price and they're like, hey, you know, we're pricing 20 or 30% higher than what we did last year. There's no reason to do that. Right now, if you price in line with what you were doing on average last year, maybe a little bit higher, you have the potential to take market share, especially understanding that the market at large is not really paying that much attention or making that price competitive. So you don't even have to go all the way to what you're doing last year. You only have to be paying attention to it to potentially undercut the market and just take the market share that's available. All right, guys, I hope you found that to be really helpful and informative as you're setting up your strategy for the rest of the summer, going into the fall, and also starting to look early for next year. Just a reminder, all of the data we looked at today, those market reports, are freely available for anyone who makes a Wheelhouse account. You can see any market in the country. So remember how I said in the summer, look at some of the other like panhandle markets or markets with high summer just to see what the macro is. You can access that for free through Wheelhouse. In addition, I mentioned a lot about pace. So we talked about the market pace, but you also need to know how your portfolio is pacing, how it's performing. If you need some additional tools to very quickly and easily see what your pace is by month, what your pace is by week, how that compares to where you were last year, where your sales are showing up, sign up for Wheelhouse and let us know. We'll get you set up on our free Performance Insights tool. It's a great tool, and we're happy to provide you training on how to use it. If you're interested in using Wheelhouse pricing, we also offer the top best-in-class revenue management platform, including excellent dynamic pricing, great tooling, especially for bulk tooling and enterprise that can go all the way down to great visualizations. And we are the primary pricing software chosen by pretty much all the major enterprise property managers in space. So if you'd like to know more about Wheelhouse, let us know. Otherwise, I hope you found this helpful. Thanks. Bye.